Good to go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Cambridge Union on this wonderful sunny day. We're really delighted this evening to be able to welcome Gina Miller, businesswoman and activist, to speak to us. Ms. Miller is perhaps most famous for her role in initiating our Miller and DeSantos versus Secretary of State for the exiting of the European Union. I hope for all the lawyers in the room I said the name of that correctly. No doubt you'll all be far more informed on this topic than me, but without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Gina Miller.
Hello. Good evening, everyone.
Oh, like some
my
water
gosh.
before we start.
Very
You do sink back into them a little bit, don't
rather
you? Yeah.
comfortable.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
No worries. I'm sure this is all the high-octane action you came here to watch this evening. It's me pouring water for the two of us. There we go. Perfect. After you.
Just one more, couple more. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I thought I might do just a little introduction and skate over a few misconceptions which might be out there. Firstly, on where did I come from? I suddenly landed in the media attention, having taken supposedly the most important legal case for hundreds of years. And then about the case itself and Brexit. That's where I think we are. I've been a transparency campaigner for nearly a decade now. In the world of investments that my husband and I work in that we were appalled that after the financial crisis, nobody was sent to jail, nobody was fined really, and nothing has particularly changed. So we started a battle against what we see as the rip-offs in the sector, and that has led to text in 3 EU directives that come into force next year. So there will be significant change to that sector for every EU member state and person or consumer in that sector. So we've been fairly successful. Secondly, I've been very vocal about what I see as the misnomers or untruths in the charity sector. Because there are many things there that I believe are wrong. There is very little transparency and scrutiny. So I'm very good at making enemies. And very good at asking questions that other people, A, may not feel they want to ask because they might be conflicted or have something to lose, or feel that they're really, the backlash would be so significant that are they quite brave enough to ask them? So I've never been frightened to ask those questions because I've always felt, be it from having nothing and living in a one-bedroom flat in Stoke Newington to where I am now through my success, is that I've never felt any differently, that the things we really, really own are our voices, our actions, and our conscience. And I will always take the opportunity to use those. So in connection to Brexit and the case, I was on the trail around the country since the October before the referendum vote. And I specifically chose to go into quite heavy leave areas because I wanted to talk to people who either disagreed with me or I thought I could persuade to my side of the argument. And my side of the argument was not just for Remain. I felt that because of the political situation in the world and the economic situation and the problems we're facing globally, that it wasn't the right time to leave or consider leaving the EU. So I was arguing for Remain, reform, because there are many things that need reforming in the EU, and then considering leaving. So Remain, reform, and review was a message that I tried to get out there. The Remain side were so arrogant, they said, Gina, we don't have to work that hard. Nobody's going to vote to leave. Culturally, Britain, as Brits, we don't take risks. We're quite lazy. It'll be fine. And the Leavers said, oh, don't worry, ideologically we'd like to leave, but it's not going to happen. So on the morning of the 24th of June, I was absolutely certain that neither side had a clue what to do next. It was we got to the place we got to through a series of political miscalculations. The Conservatives were not supposed to win outright. They were supposed to be in coalition with the Lib Dems again, and the Lib Dems were supposed to make sure that the referendum never happened. That was a huge miscalculation. And there we were. Not only did I know that no one had a clue what was going to happen next, but then we had a prime minister talking about using the royal prerogative. This ancient power that hadn't been used for over 200 years, where a monarch can decide everything on their own and bypass parliament, and use it in the Great Divorce, which was the divorce from the papacy when Henry VIII wanted that divorce. And here we were again talking about it, about this divorce. And I could not understand why nobody was saying you can't. The opposition in particular. And every day, nobody said anything. And again, nobody said anything. And any first-year student, as far as I was aware, knew that Parliament was the only place where rights could be taken away or diminished. Because wasn't it the Leavers who were banging on the table about parliamentary sovereignty? And yet we were about to bypass it. It made no sense to me whatsoever. So I wasn't a client of Mishcon de Reya. I just happened to have been booked to do a workshop at their firm on the Monday evening after the vote. And the event I was speaking at was to discuss why there is this real lack of diversity in the city and why we have not really advanced in 20 years when it comes to diversity in all its forms. And I might have said one or two provocative things. I might have said that the women who are held out as examples of diversity are actually outwardly diverse, but when it comes to unconscious bias, social backgrounds, and thinking, they're just like the men in skirts, or something along those lines, and a few other things. And afterwards, when we had drinks, one of the senior partners said to me at the law firm, "So Gina, is there anything else you feel passionate about?" So it's all his fault. Because I then spent 20 minutes saying to him, how could we possibly be in this situation where, first of all, we had a referendum that was advisory, we have an outcome where nobody has a clue what's going to go on, and cherry on the cake, we're now going to use royal prerogative. We're going to undo our parliamentary sovereignty. Because we don't have a written constitution, our constitution is actually made up with about 3 or 4 different places. It's not the fact that we don't have a constitution, it just is piecemeal. That we were going to use the royal prerogative. And I just couldn't understand it. And I said, so in the vacuum of no opposition, why can't we ask this question? And they sort of said, well, we can, but we need a litigant. The way our legal system works, lawyers can debate about this, but we need a litigant. We need someone to ask the question, we need a client. And they had been talking to 2 of their existing clients who were very high profile, very successful, very well-known men. I joined in the conversation the following day. We did a pre-action letter to the Attorney General, to the government, to the courts, saying we were thinking of bringing this case. Because we didn't know if the courts would let us bring the case. But we knew that it could be any day that the government could use the royal prerogative, and we had to do it. Time was not on our side. So we wrote the letter, and on the 19th of July, appeared in court in front of Lord Leveson for what's called an administrative hearing. And mine was not the only case. There were several other cases. There was a case about EU citizens' rights. There were other cases about the untruths that were told along the the referendum trail. And it was Lord Leveson and the court, Lord Leveson, who chose me and my case as a lead claimant. So all the right-wing press and all the fact that I'm publicity seeking and I made myself the lead claimant, you can't. It's the courts that appoint a lead claimant. And I remember looking at my email at the time and hearing him somewhere saying, Mrs. Miller will be, and sort of looking up and thinking, what has he just said? I was baffled. But then, as I thought about it and I heard his reasoning, I realized why I was the lead claimant. 3 reasons. One is we had followed the process. We were fighting about process, and we had done that pre-action letter. A lot of the other law firms and clients had just wanted to rush to be the first ones in, so they hadn't issued pre-action letters. They'd gone straight to the courts. Secondly, I'd managed to bag one of the best brains in Britain when it came to law, which is David Panic. And thirdly, because our case, or our skeleton, was not politicized. There was not one word of politics in our skeleton. We were talking about the black and white letter of the law. In a febrile political environment, I was certain that we had to be very clear on that. We had discussed whether or not we should include in our case. There's an act, 1983 Electoral Act, about lying on the electoral trail or telling truths or mistruths. And we came to the conclusion that it didn't apply to referenda. So that's the reason we didn't pursue that point. And the other point, the other elephant in the room we could have addressed was if Article 50 was revocable or not. But bearing in mind that that would have to be answered by the ECJ, could you imagine the backlash I would have had if I had brought that case? So the decision was taken that we would do something very fundamental. Brexit, it had consequences for Brexit, but we would safeguard the constitution of our country. We would safeguard parliamentary sovereignty. We would make sure that a precedent was not set that any future prime minister could not behave like a dictator or issue executive orders without parliament. So we're very clear. The press chose not to report those issues and to make it the Brexit case. They chose to try to destroy me because they thought that if they did, I would drop out and there wouldn't be a case. So there was a deliberate plan amongst the right-wing press to make sure that I was broken. They tried to ransack every part of my life, my family, my businesses, and the more they did it, the more I knew I was onto a winner. Because why were they so afraid? I thought, they're not attacking the case, they're not attacking our arguments, they're just attacking me. And my campaigning for the last 10 years has told me that when you play the man and not the ball, or the woman in this case, then I'm definitely on a winner. And the more they tried to break me, the more I knew we had a strong case. And I was determined not to be bullied into giving up. Because I hate bullies, and I hate people who tell untruths. So we came to the case, we won 3-0 in the High Court. And I thought that would be it. I had never conceived that the government would appeal. And I have come to the conclusion, and it is my strong belief, my only belief, that the reason they appealed is because they still had no plan. And they were quite happy to hang me out to dry while they gave them time to come up with a plan, because our case in the appeal would never have interfered with Mrs. May's self-imposed end of March deadline. We were very careful to make sure, the courts were very careful to make sure that that deadline was not frustrated. So we went to the High Court, and also, by the way, can I just tell you that when we saw the government skeleton, when the government case was sent to us, we were baffled because it was such a weak case. And it didn't address the legal principles and pillars of our case. It was politicized. It was not a very well thought out legal argument. And not only were we surprised that they appealed, but they knew, because we had already told them, and the other parties, that we would be, if there was an appeal, I would be adjoined by the devolved powers. So they knew all of that and still appealed. And now they've rewritten history. It's quite interesting, because now the government is saying they brought the case to ensure legal certainty, and that I appealed. So they're rewriting history, which is extraordinary to me. We won again. It was quite an extraordinary experience to have people watching, streaming, watching a case on constitutional law was so exciting. Can you ever imagine people wanting to know about parliamentary sovereignty and royal prerogative and Henry VIII? It was an extraordinary time, and that I felt was such a positive, that people in our country, for the first time, because other countries in America, they recite parts of it, they know their constitution. In Europe, for the first time, people in the UK were talking about our constitution. They were talking about the rule of law. They were talking about politics. I thought that was really exciting. And the fact that we had, for the first time, 11 judges sitting in the Supreme Court, it was the best I could ever have imagined. But what happened next? So I won in the Supreme Court, gave MPs, put them back exactly where they should be, in the center of the debate. and they behaved like cowards. They did not have the debate that should have been had through the referendum process. They literally just rubber-stamped the whole process. They did not even put in the two most basic amendments to that bill. One, a moral amendment, which was guaranteeing EU citizens' rights. The second was about them safeguarding their place in this process, which was a meaningful vote at the end of the process. They just gave in. And that just got me so angry, because I thought, I've invested so much. I've given up so much. I've given up my safety, my family's safety. I've taken away my time from my business because I haven't stopped doing all the things I've been doing. All of this I've been doing in my spare time. And I could not understand why they were not standing up. And that, I still feel, is a great shame, because the debate, there was a missed opportunity, because we could have had the debate about Brexit that we didn't have through the referendum, lead up to the referendum. Then we triggered Article 50. The white paper, again, did not spell out the options. And then we had an election with the manifestos, which again didn't spell out the options. I don't believe we're anywhere closer to knowing what Brexit means now than we were 18 months ago. None of the options have really been explored. We talk about hard Brexit, soft Brexit, no Brexit deal. Do you know what any of that detail means? What does any of it mean? What are the options? How can we make a decision? And where we are now, the will of the people, this is supposed to disappear. Everybody else who has a question to ask should now disappear. Does that mean that when we vote in an election, the losing party or the losing side should just disappear and that's it? We all have the right to ask legitimate questions. We all have the right to stand up and be counted. And we all have the right to use our voices and our conscience and our actions. And that's what I've done, and that's what I'll carry on doing. And that's what I'll say to all of you in this room, is that every single one of you can do that. Every single one of you can make a change and ask questions and make sure that there is scrutiny. And know in your gut, because you do know instinctively when something is right or wrong. And you can stand up and say, this is wrong. I want to be heard. And if you come together as a group online, that's what social media actually allows you to do. You can become voices that are asking the questions, even if the politicians aren't asking it. And that's something I hope that many, many of you do, from maybe have already started doing, but do as this process carries on. Because we cannot let the politicians, with a lack of courage, lack of honesty, hijack something that is going to change, be the most fundamental game changer for generations, to go unchallenged.
Thank you so much. So a couple of questions before I think we go over
Sure.
towards the audience. So politicians, lack of courage, lack of honesty, but still sovereign in our society and still the people that when we elect them should be able to have the final say on the Brexit deal, you think?
Yes.
Do you think that Parliament should have a free vote, even now after the election, on whether or not we should exit the European Union?
Absolutely. They're going to get a free vote on fox hunting. So I think they should have a free vote on Brexit. And the fact is that we don't know, nobody can predict the future. Mm-hmm. We don't know the state of the EU, we don't know what deal we'll get. So it should be that our representatives that we've elected and we pay to be in Parliament actually do their job of work. I don't believe that the representative parliamentary democracy we have is broken. I think as a system it works, because if you had direct democracy, every single day we would be voting on every single issue. I mean, we wouldn't have time to do anything else if we were being asked to do everything. So I think the system works. I do think we have the wrong people, or many of the wrong people. So this campaign, I have been focused on backing people who I think are incredibly passionate, want to do something good, and have chosen the path of politics to make a difference. And I have seen many, many of them on this Best Britain, this campaign I've just done. And I have to say, many of them have been elected into Parliament. So I have a good feeling about the people who will be in Parliament.
And then talking about people who are incredibly energized and wanting to make a change and do good in politics, it can't help but have escaped everybody's notice, even if anecdotally, that this was an election where lots of young people turned out last Thursday. Do you think, given that young people are overwhelmingly in favour of remaining in the European Union, that that changes the mandate that Parliament has after the referendum, or how do you think that that intersects with issues to do with leaving?
I think if we had the same percentage of turnout in the referendum vote that we've had in the last election, we would not be having this conversation. We would not be where we are.
So why didn't young people turn out over the EU?
I don't think that for years now we haven't had the same involvement from young people. This is the first time for many, many elections that we've actually gone out. And on the doorstep, I mean, one of the things I did in my campaign was ensure that we got that turnout. I think we affected more than 1 million people, young people under 30s, to register to vote, and over 200,000 women, because that's also a demographic that haven't traditionally turned out to vote. And it's fantastic because it'll be habit forming. But what I discovered going around the country and talking to lots of young people and doing lots of what I call Brexit cafes and online YouTube, I discovered a whole new world. I didn't know all about bloggers and YouTubers who have one young man has 4 million followers. I was like, really? It was, really exciting. But what I got is that there was this feeling that what was the point? What's the point of us voting? What's the point of us getting involved? Nobody really listens to us. Our voice is not heard. And also a great sense of mistrust. Not in one particular party or another, but just politicians. And I've gone out there, and what I've said is, but you can't complain if you don't use your voice. And politics is not something that just happens to you. It governs every part of your life, to your bins being emptied, to street lights, to our environment, to our water. Every part of your life is political, is influenced by politics. And that's a thing that people came away and we were able to change and engage with and really increase in energy. And that was the most exciting thing, I think, about this election for me, was how many under 30s realized that they could be engaged in politics and they really did matter and their voices could make a difference. And I think that will carry on.
So those same under 30s, though, a lot of them voted for Jeremy Corbyn, who
Yes.
I don't think you're much of a fan of necessarily.
I think I've been surprised at what he's managed to do. I think when it comes to Brexit, there's still lots of mixed messages coming from the Labour Party, and I don't think they've been tough enough. They have not been a strong opposition, official opposition, and democracy only works when you have a fully functioning opposition. They've been a bit too obsessed with their own internal politics and their own internal culture and fights. And I don't think that's helped the country. But we do seem to be going into a different phase. But of the conversations I had with young people, because none of the political parties actually talked about Brexit, even though this was supposed to be a Brexit election. There's a BuzzFeed and Facebook have this social media barometer on conversations. And apart from myself and my Best for Britain campaign, which topped every conversation, there were no other conversations on Brexit. So I can say when it came to Brexit, most of the Remain young people who were talking about Brexit were voting for Remain or were voting against a hard Brexit, even if it wasn't for Remain.
Now, having covered Jeremy Corbyn as well, tomorrow, interesting enough, for those of you who are interested, we have a chap called Godfrey Bloom coming to speak at the Union, who you went on an election blind date with.
I don't know if any of you heard about this. So the BBC did a very clever thing. They decided to sort of put a bit of excitement into the whole election process. And they came up with a version of First Dates, where they wanted to get a Remainer and a Leaver. So all the women were Remainers and all the men were Leavers. And we had no idea who it would be, and so you do the thing, first of all, where they do an interview and they say, so who do you think it is that you're going to go? And I was thinking to myself, oh, it's going to be Farage, or it's going to be Michael Gove.
Well, now I've got to ask. You've given me two there, and we already had a previous there. So Snog, Marry, Avoid, Farage, Gove, and Godfrey Bloom.
Well, then let me finish my story first.
Right,
I walked in.
I am going to press you on that one.
So I walked in, and I saw Godfrey, and I wasn't quite sure what I should do. Do I turn around and walk away? And I thought, no, that's not, because I've always been of the mind that you sit down and have a civilized conversation with people that you disagree with or disagree with you. So I sat down. The first thing he did was introduce himself to me. And I said, Godfrey, I do know who you are. And then he started so one of his first two sort of attacks on me, the first one was, so who are you poking your nose in? You're not even a politician. And I said, so is it only politicians who can talk about politics? I didn't know that. I thought we all had the right to talk about politics. So that sort of put him off his attack at the time. And then, as a conversation, it's actually very amusing. because at the end of it, he actually agrees with nearly everything I say.
That was my takeaway from it as well. He seems
He
a rather
actually
confused
takes,
man.
and afterwards, when we sort of then do the two to camera, what do you think? Are you then going to go on a date again? He even offered to meet when he next came back to London. So the whole thing was quite an extraordinary experience. But I do think it's important that you engage with the other side. No, it was quite an experience. And Rachel Johnson, my friend Rachel, she had her dinner date with Nigel Farage. But the funniest one of all was Peter Stringfellow and Mary Beth, where she actually spends the whole lunch flirting with him. It was just quite extraordinary to watch.
Mary Beard is in Mary Beard,
Yes,
Professor of
yes,
Classics
Professor.
here.
Yes,
Yeah.
you have to watch it. It's very, very amusing. So her lunch was with Peter Stringfellow.
Now, you've done a very, very good diversion tactic there, and I think we'd all commend you for that. But come on, Snog, marry, avoid, Farage, Gove, and then Mr. Bloom.
Well, I think I would avoid all three of them.
Probably a reasonable answer. But the other interesting thing that I took away from your chat with Godfrey, and it's something that I think I'll bring up with him tomorrow, is the real thing you both seem to agree on was just this absolutely vehement hatred of Theresa May, and that she's not a good Prime Minister.
I was quite surprised by that, because...
So why do you think that she is, in a way, uniting opinion just completely against her at this point? How is she serving nobody?
My worry, and I still have it, I think now she will be a Prime Minister in name only, but my concern was that she was being advised by three people who were not elected, that the cabinet and the country was not operating the way it should have been, that there wasn't consultation. As far as I am aware, I believe only 6 people saw, 6 of the anybody in the 6 Conservative members of Parliament saw the manifesto before it was actually issued, which is shocking. And the stories in the city or in business of you're not allowed to go in and ask any questions. If anyone brings up, you're not allowed to actually, you weren't allowed to oppose her in any way or any of her opinions. That is not the way you run a country. And also this idea of, as we approach Brexit, because I am a Democrat and I do believe we have to go through this process, but then we have a free vote at the end of it, to have somebody who is inflexible, incapable of taking advice, because this is going to be such a challenge. You have to have somebody who has a great mind and a great heart and a real sense of innovation and creativity and thinking, and I don't believe she has those qualities.
And then the bit before I just go to the audience who have no doubt far more learned questions to ask you than myself playing a game of Snog, Marry, Avoid with you. When you say that she's going to be a Prime Minister in name only, now we at the Cambridge Union here, we love conspiracy theories. Who, if not Theresa May, is now the shadowy puppet master pulling all the strings from behind the scenes?
No, I think we'll have a proper functioning cabinet. I think you'll have voices in there, and it's quite interesting, the makeup of the cabinet. But I have to say, I disagree that there'll be, I know many people have talked about there'll be a leadership challenge soon. I don't think that's helpful for us as a country, and I don't think it's helpful for the Conservative Party. And I don't actually think anyone wants a job, because who would want to be, they'd ruin their careers going through the Brexit process, because they're coming to the realization that it's such a complex process, that who would want to take that job on? So I think she will remain in post.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and that's pretty much everything from me. Is there anyone in the audience that has any questions? Well, there's a hand that shot straight up there, so if a steward could be equally fast in getting a microphone there, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing the case. I actually contributed to the fighting fund, so I'm very glad we won.
Thank you.
You mentioned possible reforms of the European Union. Now, every politician who's ever said to me they wanted to reform the European Union, I've always said, yes, and what reforms would you like? And they never have an answer. So I want to ask you what your answer would be, what reforms you would like. And could I ask you also, if you have time, could you say something about the Knight's opinion and a possible another case?
Okay, the first one is I think that there possibly has to be, I would like to see Strasbourg gone. And for us to have there should be more meetings in the member states rather than just in Brussels. I think that it's too centralized, too autocratic, too bureaucratic. I think some of the lesser member states need to have more of a voice. I think it could be that the economic decisions made in the EU need to have more involvement rather than just the Franco-German motor that drives the EU. It needs to be far more collective in its decision making. So that's some of the things that I think could be reformed. And I think when it comes to immigration, that there needs to be not intra-European state entry, but into Europe immigration needs to be something that is debated by Europe, because it is an issue. The free movement of people, the mass movement of people into Europe is something that's going to have to be confronted by the member states. On your second question, the knights, or it was 3 knights, it was actually 5, as we know. I don't think we're in that place now. I think the election has changed everything, because we are now talking, more and more voices are talking about a full and free vote. Macron has said the door will be left open. He is now possibly the most important figure in Europe, along with Merkel. They need us as much as we need them. And they are very sad that we are not at the table. And they saw us as being able to bring together the different voices and being a game changer in Europe. And I know they're very regretful that we are not there on the table. So I think that we don't have to talk about bringing that case. I think that case, the door is open. I think it is revocable. And we know from Lord Kerr, we know from all the great and the good, even the ECJ opinion itself, is that it is revocable. Article 49 actually says it is revocable anyway. So I don't think we need to bring that case. The only possible case that I can see actually rests on the judgment of my case. In that, if whichever government at the end of the negotiated process only offers the binary deal or no deal option, then I will take them back to Parliament, because my case very clearly says that only Parliament can take away diminished rights. And until we know what deal is brought back, we will not know what rights are lost or diminished. Because the Article 50, the law, the Act of Parliament, was only for triggering Article 50. It did not decide which rights would be lost or not. So I believe there need to be 3, and my legal team believe there needs to be 3 Acts of Parliament at least. There may well need to be many more. One was to trigger Article 50, one at the time of the negotiated package coming back, 18 months time if we don't get the extension, and then the Great Repeal Bill. So if the government doesn't offer that full and free vote, that will be the time for another legal action.
Fantastic. And then I think we'll go for one over here now. So in the middle, I'll give the steward something more difficult to do this time.
Hi. I was just wondering what your views on referendums are now, given the EU referendum. What lessons can we learn for future referendums? And indeed, do you, as someone who calls yourself, you say you're a Democrat, but you also believe in parliamentary sovereignty as well, where do your opinions lie on referendums and the future of referendums?
Right now, I don't believe in plebiscite referenda for 2 reasons. One is that you need to have infrastructure, as they do in other countries, to bring referenda, to make sure that they are representative, truly representative of the population. And secondly, if you have direct democracy through referenda, you'd have something every single day, because it isn't just about one issue. We spend our time every single day looking at issues that we don't really understand the nuances about. Because when it's important issues, I think it should be cross-party committees. I've always felt that. It should be cross-party committees who are sitting, debating, looking at the facts, looking at the detail. When you have people who tend to read information, especially online, which just confirms their own views, does that really confirm that you're in a place, you have the knowledge to make those decisions that are very difficult decisions? So on one hand, I think perhaps if our system, and we end up with career politicians who seem incapable of putting the country first, perhaps there is a case for reviewing and looking at more referenda, but the structures would have to be in place. We'd have to have a percentage of the population around the country that would have to vote. You'd have to have, there has to be an infrastructure behind referenda. And the Referendum Act, it would have to be a different Referendum Act, because the last act, which pertained to the Brexit, was very poorly drafted.
And then, yeah, over there.
I'd just like to say thank you, Ms. Miller, for bringing the case and for your views on referenda as not having authoritative bindings. I think that does tend to undermine parliamentary sovereignty and our parliamentary democracy. If we say that the result of a referenda gives the executive the power to essentially bypass or leapfrog Parliament, then I think that does damage our democracy. What I would like to know is, what are your views on the devolution issue with regards to Brexit? Do you think that the devolved legislatures should have an authoritative say on the final deal, or any process, or any stage of the process for that matter?
I think that we should have, my view is that we should have a Brexit delegation that is going forward representing us in Europe as we go through the negotiations, not just cross-party, but also from the devolved powers. I think we should have a representation on that committee from them as well, because it does affect all the devolved powers in very different ways. And it's very difficult, because the most destructive part of Brexit will be for Ireland. And it's one of the things that we haven't heard enough, because the EU have made it very clear that the three things that are going to have to be settled first before we even start talking about the new relationship is people, which is our citizens abroad and EU citizens here, money, the divorce bill, and Ireland. And that's one of the things I found quite surprising in my case. I couldn't quite understand why the courts, there's something called the Seal Convention, which in a nutshell is that if peoples in a devolved power are going to be disproportionately affected by a decision, then they should have a say. I didn't quite understand why the Northern Ireland case that's submitted that had joined me didn't have more prominence, because it could well be that Brexit ends up undoing the peace process, as we know. And I spoke to the Attorney General from Ireland a couple of Fridays ago, and they're very, very concerned. And he's saying that one of the things that could happen if we pursue Brexit and it goes ahead and it's a hard Brexit, or it's something that disadvantages them, that they will be pushing for unification. I don't know how that would work now if the government has a relationship with the DUP, but it is very, very difficult. I mean, I got hugely criticized in my tactical voting campaign for not backing SNP candidates, because I couldn't bring myself to back Sturgeon as much as I admire her in many other ways, the idea of breaking up the union, because I do believe we should preserve the union. So I was in a sort of a hard place there. It was very difficult for me, even though there were lots of good SNP candidates that we could have supported. So I do think the devolved powers should be involved in this process. Sorry, long answer to your question.
That actually brings us on, I think we'll go to which side? Yes, we'll go that one there.
It's passing the mic.
Hi, sorry. So you spoke about you feel that there's the need for a sort of innovative and maybe radical approach in terms of who Britain puts forward to negotiate for Brexit. And obviously you've said that you don't have, it may be slightly changed now, but you don't have full belief in Jeremy Corbyn. I was wondering, as someone who is to an extent outside, you're not constrained by any sort of party political allegiances per se. I mean, do you have an idea of who in the current British political sphere would be capable of that kind of leadership? And how could Parliament possibly pick that representative?
Well, I think it's quite easy, as far as I can see. I think that the delegation should be made up. I mean, I've already decided, to my mind, it should be Vince Cable, Keir Starmer, David Davis, Philip Hammond, and Caroline Lucas to represent the environmental issues and arguments that are being completely ignored in all of this. And then a member of each of the devolved powers. So I'm quite clear as who I think should be there. And I think both David Davis and Philip Hammond would have to somehow, and you could never get them to do this, would have to say that they would not stand for leadership, because I think that will be what will happen before the end of the year, or maybe early next year, or even whenever it is. At some point, there will be a leadership challenge. I do not in any way, shape or form want to see Boris as part of that team, because I know what the Europeans' view of Boris is. And yes, we don't need a joker in the time of real crisis. But that's who I think could be on that committee very easily and very quickly and have the real sort of knowledge and experience and pragmatism and realism that this whole debate needs and this whole negotiation needs.
Yes, over here. Oh, do pass the parcel again.
Hello. Mrs. Miller, you've spoken about your desire for a free vote in Parliament on Brexit. I guess a yes or no on the deal that comes about. How likely do you think a truly free vote will be in the aftermath of what you've described as cowardice of Parliament, just voting in the same way as the referendum result, and given the potential political suicide, let's say, of an MP voting against the result of his constituency?
I think this election has been a game changer. Irrespective of what is now being touted as 83% of the country voted for hard Brexit, that's not true. That was not in the manifesto, in the Labour manifesto. What I've come to realize with my journey in this, becoming part of the political landscape, is that politicians need to be given permission. And time is on our side, and the reality of the options that are going to be, and the more we inform people, or more we explain, or the government and different parties, be it from scientists, from academia, from NHS, from business, all start talking about what these different options will mean, then that debate can then advance. Because you can't say, in the face of evidence, that you can't think again. And I think that the politicians, I believe that they will be given permission by circumstances, by the reality of the situation, and by young people in particular voicing their opinions, to have that debate in Parliament. So I think, to my mind, a full and free vote means all options, including remaining, because what they have, look, the acid test is very simple to my mind, is what option leaves us better off than where we are today? And if you don't have that option, why would we commit suicide?
Yes, over there.
So obviously there's been a lot of different groups trying to fund people from across different progressive parties in addition to your own. I was wondering, given how you were talking earlier about the decision-making process for your group, sort of backing people who were very focused on the detail, on specific things rather than sort of broad ideological side. I was wondering if you've thought that some of these other organisations, I can't remember the names of them specifically, but
there are lots
I
of
think
them.
Paddy Ashdown is a big one.
Yes.
I was wondering if you thought that they were too sort of unsubtle or too sort of narrowly ideological in terms of backing anti-Brexit candidates.
I think I just couldn't understand many of the stances that you would go against the vote. Because we did have a vote and we lost. The Remainers lost. And to try and undo that, then you surely don't respect democracy. So I couldn't understand some of the stances. But I will say from, I think, some of the groups you're hinting at, I could not believe the infighting. Because actually what they should have done is all the people in that space, all the progressive alliances, all the Remain groups, all the grassroots organizations, should actually have worked together. But they all have, you've got what I might have, again, upset a few of the politicians. You probably know who I'm thinking of. When I sort of said to them, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not coming to a meeting with you because you're sort of like an old vaudeville act. You still think you're relevant, but you're actually poisonous. So why would I even think about getting into, joining organizations? But if this is a problem, we have too many people with big egos who will not put the country first, and that's what I find so disappointing. Is that if you go into politics, you should surely do it because you believe in your country and you believe in representing your country, not just in having power. And that's not just in the UK. And I think it's something that we're seeing across the globe. And I find it very disappointing that more of those groups didn't work together. I have to tell you that one of them is going to launch a new party. What day are we now? Wednesday, today.
Wednesday, the 14th of June.
It
at
was
19:49.
planned before the election that there was going to be a launch, as far as I was aware, of a new party today. But because of the referendum result and the high turnout, they realized that perhaps there wasn't a space for this centrist, progressive alliance party that they were thinking of. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but right now, as far as I'm aware, it's been shelved.
Having said that, though, who's coming up with the idea of a new party? Are you going to spill the beans for us? Is there going to be a big old...
There were many who were talking about it. At the moment, where we are now, nobody's talking about it. Everyone's shelved it, because what they've realized is that there is actually a real opportunity for Labour to revive itself. And if, as I say, Corbyn and Momentum bring in some of the people like Miliband and Cooper, etc., that they're talking about in the shadow cabinet, then we could have a much more relevant Labour Party than we've had in the past.
But presumably it was people from the right wing of the Labour Party who were thinking about this sort of thing? People who thought that maybe things could only get better?
Yes.
That would be very exciting, wouldn't it? Glad to know that reference wasn't lost on everyone in the chamber. Yes, we'll go there again. Fantastic.
So obviously the Liberal Democrats were maybe the party who put discussions about Brexit.
We're aware that Farron's just stepped down.
I was about to say the end part of this is Mr. Farron has just sort of capitulated his position. So obviously the Lib Dems were the only party that really made Brexit a core focus of their campaign, and after what was initially said it was going to be a great campaign for them, sort of diminished into
It's a real shame. I feel it's a real shame, and the reason I can say on the doorstep and anecdotally, the reason why I don't think that message of the second referendum really cut through is because on the doorstep, I could tell you people, when we first started on the 19th of April, the day after the announcement for the election, and we started hitting the ground running, people were exhausted at the idea of a referendum or another election, not again. And I think one of the reasons is that because they were pushing that message so hard of a second referendum, people were thinking, oh no, not again, not another one. That was really difficult for them. And obviously, you've got the fact that he was personally attacked and all the other things. But also, what I think is a real shame is that in the tactical voting that we pushed, the Greens had made a decision very early on to step down in 5 particular seats. And the Lib Dems would not step down and tactically vote, and neither would Labour. And because of that, it's very sad, but the Green Party now, I mean, they could have won 2 more seats. They could have won in the Isle of Wight, and they could have won in Bristol South, I think it is. But because of other people not embracing tactical voting as they did, they are suffering now, financially and through their membership. They're actually in a really bad place. And I think that's a real tragedy, because we need the Green Party, and we need somebody talking about the environment, and we need, them to survive. So I think one of the unintended consequences, sadly for me, of tactical voting is that it has really hurt the Green Party.
Fantastic, and thank you so much. And that's pretty much now all we've got time for. Just a brief summary of the events that we've got coming up now in the next couple of days. We have tomorrow the presidential debate, my swan song as it were, which is This House Believes Britain is Not Great. Myself and Imran, who sat there, will be taking on Peter Hitchens and Godfrey Bloom.
Oh my gosh, I wish I was a fly on the wall for that.
Well, if you're around, you're very...
I'm not,
if you want to debate, actually, we've got a spot
brilliant.
open. Maybe. And then on Friday, we could potentially, and keep your eye on the Facebook page, be having a special guest in collaboration with the Strawberries and Cream Festival, paying us a visit. If that's the case, then he will be arriving late and probably somewhat unannounced. But I promise you that it wasn't me who revealed that, and it's certainly going to be a really interesting talk if it does occur. Again, if any of you got the reference there, have a cookie on me. Then going into the next week after that, Artur Mas will be joining us on the 19th of June as well, right towards the end of term. And then that's pretty much it from us and the Cambridge Union. So thank you so much, Gina, for coming and speaking to us today. That was absolutely fantastic. So if we have another round of applause, please, for Ms. Miller.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. You head off? Yeah.